Dear church, let's talk church reset with Jack Wilkie. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined for the second week in a row by my friend Jack Wilkie. Jack, thank you so much for joining me again. I appreciated our discussion last time, and I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, good being back again. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So Jack is with Focus Press, not far from me here in Dixon, Tennessee, over in the Nashville area, and writing articles and blogging and doing work for them and preaching and doing all those things, and just appreciate his input. And we're talking about church reset. Now, again, our last discussion, Jack, was on an article that you wrote. This one is as well. A lot of things in it that I found hit home with me as well, and some things that I've even been trying to emphasize with our congregation, both at Oldham Lane when I was in Abilene and here in Dixon as well. And that is rethinking how we are doing things and our approach, our mentality, what we're going to be, who we're going to be going forward. Talk a little bit about the article and kind of what inspired you to write about a church reset.
Yeah, it actually ended up turning into a book a year or so after I wrote the article, and so that's out there on Amazon. Anyone wants to check that out. It was looking around at what we were doing, what I was doing in ministry, and you just look at the glimpses of the church in the text. Of course, Acts 2, we know the 3,000 baptized, and the church is getting together, they're eating together, they're studying together, they're praying together is just kind of the theme there. And you look at Ephesians 4, what every joint supplies. You look at 1 Corinthians 12 and the gifts, and that no part can say to the other that I don't need you. And yet it felt like we have this system in which it's kind of come as you are, come bring what you want to bring, and we'll take that. And so the concept that I kind of focused on is church really has been set up like a business, the consumer provider model. There's those of us in leadership and ministry that, we're going to put something on for you. And if you like what we have here and you agree generally with what we're saying, you can come here and be a part of it. And we've got something for you, kind of like a restaurant. Here's the meal, come get it and then go home. The church isn't a restaurant. It's a potluck. Everybody brings something. Everybody has a contribution that's expected of them. And again, this model of, you just kind of, well, if you want to show up on Sunday morning, okay, that's all you want to do. That's all we're going to get out of you. It leads to what, people call the 90-10 or the 80-20 of most of the work is done by a select few. And that's just not the picture. You see this family, this close knit where everybody's bringing something to the church. And so it's really an exploration of how do we get back to that, and why are we not that? And this business like thing just can't work, I guess, is the main thesis.
Yeah, I feel like putting it into my terms, what you were saying was that the church is not an organization; it's an organism, right? It's living and breathing and moving. Yeah, there's an aspect where I guess you could say it is an organization, but that's not primarily what it is. It's an organism, and it's something that was meant to be, alive and breathing and growing and developing. Would I be right in characterizing it that way?
For sure. The organization thing is such an interesting terminology because we just do things in the form of organizations, businesses and social groups, clubs, things like that. And so church can take on that characteristic. And like you're saying, it is an institution to a point, but in the same sense that a family is an institution, in the same sense that a nation is an institution, a group of people is those things. And so you're always going to have leadership. You're going to have people at the top. It's a hierarchy. It's, some people want to just kind of remove all hierarchy. It's not that. There is eldership. There's this leadership structure God put in place. But what is that for? In the same sense that God put parents over a family, it's for the mutual growth. It's for shared love. It's for, as you said, an organism is not a stagnant thing. It's a constantly growing and changing thing. And so taking both of those structures and kind of blending them into what we have as the church, you need both. You need the institutional structure, but you also need the contribution of every part.
Yeah, well said. I feel like so often we hear, we need to get back to being the first century church, right? And of course, I think, well, which one? Because,
Right.
some that you don't necessarily want to be like, but, we need to get back to being the first century church. And oftentimes our focus is on what happens within the walls, right? Making sure that we're, something we talked about in our last episode is the traditionalism, making sure that we've got, the order of worship right and the things that we do in worship, which is certainly important. But it drives me a little crazy when I hear people say that, because our focus is not necessarily on what they did. We say we be who they were, we do as they did, and that'll be enough. But we're not doing what they did. They were a movement. And I feel like a lot of times our churches are just a monument to a once great movement.
So I've said before that the Restoration movement was really targeted at doctrine. And so it was restoring orthodoxy. It was restoring the ways we do things, kind of the rules we play by, if you'll take that metaphor. We need a second restoration movement, which is restoring their practice, as you're saying, we're not a building, because when people say church, most people mean either the event, I got to go to church on Sunday. We have church tomorrow morning. It's the worship, it's Bible class. It's 9 to 10 on Sunday morning. Or they mean the building. Well, I've got to I got to swing by the church and pick something up. And so when we say church, we don't think of it as this group of God's people, as all of the New Testament things that it's talked about as it's all of us, because it lends to that institutional mindset of that is there whether I go or not. That is there whether I choose to partake in it or not. Well, no, if you're a member, and we use member in the same sense, in the club sense, right? I'm a member of a gym. I'm a member of the Boy Scouts or whatever. No, member is a part of. It means a member like your hand. It's a part of the body. It doesn't get to come and go. It's always a part of that body. And so you really boil down these terms of what are we restoring? What is the church? What is a member? And you kind of look at. We haven't taken biblical definitions on any of these things.
Yeah, that's true. My dad grew up in a church out on a farm, a little white clapboard building, and right next to it was a cemetery. And I since learned that for a long time, churches were built that way. There was a church and there was a cemetery right next to it. And I remember visiting later on and seeing this old abandoned church and the cemetery there, thinking, what an apt portrait, unfortunately, sometimes, is you have this monument to a once great movement. They move on from one monument to the other. They move from a stationary, building to and a stationary, what once was a movement to the ground and to, the graveyard. And it's sad, but that's kind of an apt description sometimes. I feel like we're missing it when it comes to this restoring first century Christianity, like you said, and we're missing that movement aspect of it. What's it going to take to get there, Jack? I mean, how do we reset?
So the problem, I'm going to spoil my own book here, but that I say that the biggest reason church isn't what it's supposed to be is it's about something other than Jesus. It's about, for some people, it's about spiritual comfort. It's about becoming a better person. It's about Bible knowledge sometimes, where you're so focused on knowledge that you kind of miss the point. There's the ones that pervert the gospel, where it's about health and wealth and things like that, and self-esteem. And it's not about any of those things. And one of the things that some people don't like that I say, but I think it's true, being a Christian isn't about getting to heaven. A lot of times we say, well, it's about getting to heaven. No, you get to go to heaven as part of being a Christian. That is absolutely part of it. But if you look at the New Testament, what Paul says over and over and over is, my job is to make you like Jesus, is to have Christ formed in you in Galatians and Romans 8, that we're being conformed to the image of his son. And there's all these verses that keep saying becoming more like Jesus. And so if we had and this is the way I explain it, is if you have a church full of people who want to go to heaven, you're going to have people who might, do things that they think they're supposed to do that will get them to heaven. If you have a church full of people who want to be like Jesus, that changes the way they're acting every day, the way they think about everything, the way they're submitting to God in every part of life. That is a huge shift. And so, number one, it's about making the church about making Jesus followers. But number two, I really think we've misunderstood the Great Commission. I mean, when we say Great Commission, our mind immediately goes to evangelism.
Yep.
That's no doubt a big part of it, but it's a lot bigger than evangelism, because it's not just going and preaching the gospel to people and baptizing them, but what's the next part?
Yeah.
Teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. It's essentially training people to be like Jesus. And so, a lot of times we aim our efforts at getting people in the door, getting the baptism numbers up. We want the numbers, but what do you do when somebody's baptized? Are we bringing them to the point where they are striving to emulate Jesus in their own home life, as a mother, as a father, as a parent, or as a spouse? I mean, as an employee, as a citizen, as a neighbor, as everything that they are should be reflecting Christ likeness. And if you had a church full of people doing that, could you imagine the difference?
Yeah.
Rather than a church full of people who are coming because their parents came, coming because they want to go to heaven, coming because they think they're supposed to, or whatever the reasons may be. You can start to picture in your mind how things would change.
Totally agree. I've said the same thing many times. And, we look at the Bible as our manual for how to get to heaven. And, like you said, with Paul and the others, the focus wasn't on going to heaven when you die. The focus was on being like Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
growing and developing. I think we're event-minded people, right? We tend to focus on whatever the next big event is, whether it be vacation or Christmas or whatever it is. And for
Right.
Christians, it's heaven. And we forget about the journey. And if you make the goal being like Jesus, the destination is never going to be a question. I mean, you're going to get there, but the
Right.
goal should be to be like Jesus. I love how you put that, though. If we all make it our goal to be like Jesus, then what kind of church could we have? Talk about vision. How important is vision in all this? Whether it be the elder setting the vision, the staff setting the vision with the elder. I mean, talk about vision and how important that is to get people to where we need to be.
Yeah, so you go to Ephesians 4, where you're given the list of here's the leadership that God put in place, and he mentioned some apostles, prophets that maybe we don't have anymore, but elders and preachers and teachers, those things that are in there, evangelists and teachers, I guess I should say. And what is their job? It says to equip, given for the equipping of the saints. And so it is that mindset shift of, I'm not trying to get people in the door. I'm trying to make these people like Jesus. And so that is raising the bar for everybody, is setting the expectations way higher to say, hey, if you're going to be a member here, number one, we need you to attend. The attendance should be just an afterthought at this point. But number two, let's figure out ways to individually build you up to where you need to be and where you can become a contributing part, because it starts there in Ephesians 4:11 about, okay, he's given all of these roles for the equipping of the saints, and it's about bringing it to maturity in Christ the head and us the body, according to what every joint supplies. And so as a leader, that vision has to be what's in place of of thinking about everybody in the church and thinking, how do we get more out of them? How do we get this person's commitment level up? How do we get this person back in the building? How do we get this person, that they're showing great? How do we get them to excel still more and take that next step, and look at the people under your care as, where are they in this journey with Jesus? And you look at what Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, find faithful men. I, Paul, taught you, Timothy, you find faithful men, they'll teach others. Start looking at who in our church can we equip to do this work with us? How do we multiply ourselves so it's not the consumer provider thing, but man, we're getting the guys of the church along so they can do something, they can contribute, they can bring something to the table. And, because church is Sunday to a lot of people, it's that event, we think, okay, well, maybe we can have them wait on the table. You know what? Some people's contribution might not be anything to do with the Sunday morning worship. It might
Yeah.
be just ways they can help out around the building, ways they can serve elderly members, ways they can just whatever it is. There's a million different things if we think outside the Sunday hour as to where somebody could contribute to the church. And so the vision has to be, let's find a way for everybody to be part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was Paul's vision. That should be our vision as well. I like that. Jack, when I was at Oldham Lane, we would have about once a quarter, the elders and staff would get together on like a Thursday night, and we'd have these think bigger, do better meetings. And the rule was we couldn't talk about anything that we would talk about in an elders meeting. We're talking about vision items, things that to help us to be better, think bigger, do better, right? And
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I found that constantly hindered us from moving forward was things like traditionalism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a vocal minority that won't like that, and so therefore we kind of put the brakes on it. How do we navigate those waters? Because there are many obstacles in the way if you're wanting to do a church reset, and many of them are not biblical truth matters. They're just things that we've grown accustomed to, and we don't like to think differently or do differently when it comes to those things.
Sure, and that's a huge part of the vision is, as shepherds, knowing your flock, is knowing where your sheep will go and where they won't, and knowing what needs to be pushed and tested and what you can probably back off on, and just kind of let them have that one. And so I'm actually in the process of working on the follow-up book, which is kind of the authority matter of the leadership, because as you said, so many times a church remains stagnant because, well, sister so and so is going to get angry if we. I mean, I was part of a church that almost split over moving Sunday evening worship to Sunday afternoon. Well, we've always done it this way, and we can't move it, and all of the reasons, everything you'd expect, tradition. It's been this way, and that's how it's going to be. And it was enough. It was like, well, this is something that not everyone can make the time that we have, but we could get more people that they say they can make this with their schedule or whatever, with things they have going on. Their work week starts on Sunday, whatever it was. And so, and that was a church that didn't have eldership. And so you didn't have the leadership in place to say, this is the right thing, we're going to do it. And so I think part of the vision matter is having men of God who they know they answer to him. Now, that doesn't mean you go and intentionally anger your members, of course, not at all, but being able to tell the members, look, if you're mad about this, I'm sorry. We love you. We want you to be part of this, but this is how it's going to be. But man, there's so many churches held hostage to tradition, toward the opinions of like you said, the vocal minority or whoever it is. And if that's the case, you're never going to move forward. You're never going to get to where you need to be, because you're teaching people to be Christ-like, throwing your weight around and saying, I get to do what I want. This church has to look exactly like I want it to all the time. Look at Philippians 2. Jesus emptied himself. Jesus gave up every right that he had. And if that's the attitude somebody brings, you got to confront it. And that loving confrontation is such a big deal of moving a church forward as leadership.
Yeah, for sure. When I was at a previous congregation, we were discussing building a multi-purpose facility. It would be a gym, an activity area, but also a fellowship area. There would be classrooms, a youth wing, those kind of things. And there was a handful, maybe a couple of families, or maybe 3 or 4 families that were opposed to spending the Lord's money to build this facility. Our elders and staff and many of our members, 98% of our membership, felt like this would be a great thing for our young people, for our families, a place to gather and do things. We had big plans for it. And the elders, were cognizant of the opposition from these few families, and it caused them to really kind of put the brakes on for a little bit and discuss it. And one of those elders said, well, we're the elders of them as well, the opposition. And I totally agree with that. Totally agree. But, I was somebody that was really pushing for this, and I was getting frustrated, and probably more so than I should have. But I'm thinking to myself, so you've got a small number of folks who don't have kids or grandkids in the congregation that, are threatening to leave. And we're gonna put the brakes on this and maybe even stop our talks about it and just completely dismantle the project because of 2 or 3 that don't want it. That was frustrating me. And I think we operate that way in a lot of different ways. I've said it before, and it sounds harsh, I guess, but you've got to be willing to let people go if that's, if they don't buy in, right? And maybe hopefully they find another place where they do, attend. You don't want them to fall away completely. That'd be tragic. But, it's frustrating, and it's also difficult at the same time because, as I'm not a shepherd. And so it's easy for me to play armchair quarterback, right?
Right. And that is, and that's why we should respect them so much, is how difficult the job is, and hold them up and honor them as it says. And this, going back to the business-like church thing, there is that rule in business: the customer is always right. And you see people learn that in their interaction with business, If they go to a restaurant, they go to a store, they don't like it, and they tell the manager, all right, I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
Well, then they bring that into the church, and it's one of those things where we have to be careful as church leadership not to treat people like customers, because when people get treated like customers, they act like customers. And so when we're trying to recruit them, and there's so much of modern church growth strategy that is very much kind of the give the people what they want, build the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And man, let us tell you what we can do for you, how we can make your life better. And man, being a part of a church should make your life better, and you should reap the benefits of it. But we're here for Christ. We're here in submission to him, not to any member. And so people come in, they get brought in as customers, they get recruited with, hey, we've got things that you're going to like, your kids are going to like, whatever it may be. And if those things change, or if there's something else that they don't like about the place, they do the customer thing. They lodge a complaint, and then they say, oh, all right, I'm going to the one down the street. I don't like the spaghetti and meatballs here. There's an Italian restaurant on the other side of town. I can, well, especially here in the South, you could almost walk across the street and catch another Church of Christ. And you see that. And I dealt with the same thing in Texas, of people just shuffling from one to the next to the next. And over the course of 10 years, they're in 4 or 5 different congregations, because they won't get along, because they've got that customer mentality. And like you said, it's very easy for church leadership to bend to that, to try and be everything to everybody, rather than, all right, God wants us to be this, and the people who want to be here to be part of that will, and the people who won't. Like you said, letting them leave sometimes is the best thing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't you think that maybe if there was a blessing from COVID, that maybe this was it to some degree? I feel like it kind of was a bit of a purging, but also many churches came out of COVID saying, you know what, we have a clean slate here. We can do some things differently, especially like on Sunday night and Wednesday night. And so, and they did.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of rethought the way that they do things on those 2 occasions. And I heard a lot of creative things that were done that they still are hanging on to because they've worked. Yeah, talk about that a little bit. Don't you think that COVID may have helped this some?
It's a really funny story about that. So I was writing the book at the end of 2019 on church reset, and thinking about all these things and sharing ideas with people. And a lot of people were excited about it. And not because of what I was doing, but because a lot of other people were thinking, man, we as a church need to be more of a family. We need to grow closer together. And like you say, that takes us all apart from each other, and we've got to get creative. And the book, I in fact, I approved the final cover for it, was in February 2020, and people can again Google it, look it up if they can't get the mental picture of it. It was just the chain of, like one of those paper chains of people holding hands, and that was the church, except it was in red and gray, and it ended up looking a lot like the coronavirus spike. And like, it was not planned at all. It just because that became into our public consciousness a month later, but it almost perfectly lined up with. I got messages from people going, "Man, we're reading it, and we can't get together in the building, but man, we're getting together in the park and having dinner together, and singing songs out there and fellowshipping in that way." And it's a buildingless mindset. It's a church calendarless mindset, and not that we don't need buildings, not that a church calendar is wrong. But it like you said, it caused us to rethink, how can we really, are the things we're doing bringing us closer together? Are they bringing
Yeah.
people into Christ likeness, or are we just kind of doing them Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, special event, because we've always done them? Or what purpose do these things serve? And I think that question, it was a blessing that COVID put it in front of us, but it's one that we should regularly revisit, of what are we trying to do? And are the things we're doing actually doing that? Or a lot of times, are they pushing us in the opposite direction? Are they just kind of entrenching us in tradition and stagnance and all those things?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's a key. I think that some may have this idea that we're doing exactly the way the first century church did. That if you were to walk into a church quote unquote building in the first century, or into somebody's home, and were to sit down, you would sit in a pew, you'd stare at the back of somebody's head, and you would sing 3 songs, you'd have a prayer, and everything would be exactly the way it is today. But there's more than one way to do this, and much of what we do in worship is based on tradition. much associated with it. Not everything, obviously. There's some acts of worship that we get from the New Testament, but everything surrounding that is all tradition, right? And so I think when you talk about church reset, that's kind of what we're talking about is being willing to inspect what we expect from people and from the church, and being able to say, okay, maybe this isn't the best model for getting us to where we need to be. Am I correct?
Right. And just looking at, another big part of it is kind of the one another's, and we can do this for each other the more connected we are. And so many of those things we were doing that like you're saying, we were caused to rethink, almost robbed us of one another because of the kind of 90-10 consumer producer thing. And you just kind of look at an auditorium, and I'm not saying we need to tear our auditoriums down, but stage up front, everybody facing the stage, you got the audience feel, and you can kind of come in, sit in your seat, and go home. But the people all around you, that's your family, that's your one another, that's who you're meant to serve, and that's who you're meant to benefit from. And you think about, some of the greatest spiritual growth opportunities you're ever going to get are sitting across the kitchen table from somebody for a few hours.
Yeah.
A lot of times the church building, the church events can't provide that opportunity. That has to be coming from love one another, be hospitable to one another. Some of these commands that we have. And so thinking, how do I really get access to my Christian family, to serve them, but also to gain from them, and for elderships and preachers to be thinking, all right, how do we get people to do this more organically? A potluck, a fellowship meal is great, and we should have those all the time for sure. But that's not the place where you build the real deep roots connectedness. And so how do we encourage that among our people? How do we build a culture where those things are happening organically, not because we put them on the calendar and said they have to do it? And when you start thinking through those things and creating those opportunities and leading the way on showing people, hey, this is not as hard as you think, we can do this, man, that you really start reaping the blessings. And I think people sense something special going on and want to be a part of it.
I totally agree. I think I think a lot of this falls on the one who is the shopper, so to speak. I think we go with a list, like a grocery list of what we want in a church, and we seek a church that has all those items on the list. And if they don't, we'll go to the next one, or like you said, shuffle around.
Right.
I've rarely seen someone. I say rarely. I've seen it more than rarely, but you just don't often see someone who is looking for a church home come in and say, how can I help this place to be better? What can I add to this place? How is this place going to help me grow and develop? Are they going to feed me? Typically it's, kind of superficial things. Do they have, a playground or a gym or whatever? What kind of programs do they have? Instead of, hey, what can I add to this congregation and to help it be the best that it can be? And I think that's really a big key too.
For sure. There's a tone there, and leadership needs to kind of take the lead on making this happen, where when somebody comes in, it's not, hey, we've got this for you, we got this for you, we got this, but really turning that table on them. What are you here for? What can you bring to us? We've got Jesus here. We've got the church. We've got the truth. We've got all of this stuff that is that's the main appeal that we have. Now, what about you? What part are you going to play in this? And not that somebody has to come in on day one and be plugged right into everything, but kind of like it's a question of who needs whom. And when you have that customer, that business mindset, it's, man, we need you. We need customers. We need numbers. And people get that sense of they need me so I can take my ball and go home, or I can throw my weight around or whatever. No, we don't need you. We want you. We would love you to be a part. We don't need you. You need this. And so your attitude has to be, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll be part of this.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. And I appreciate you so much, Jack. Thank you for taking your time out to be with us. This is good stuff. I want to tell our viewers and listeners that if you have a question, please feel free to email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Jack, we'll make sure he gets it. I'm sure he'll be glad to respond. Jack, one more time, tell us how to get a hold of the book.
It's on Amazon, Church Reset by Jack Wilkie. Yeah.
Good deal. And if you have other questions, comments, please let us know. Otherwise, we thank you for tuning in. Jack, thank you again for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Love it. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.